The silence within the grand ossuary of the Ethelgard High Command was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that seemed to press against the sensory tendrils of every high counselor present, threatening to suffocate them under the burden of their own ancient history. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of geocrystalline architecture, grown rather than built over 5 millennia of peace, suspended in the gravitationally neutral zone between the twin stars of the Bythos system. Great sweeping arches of translucent material caught the shifting light of the binary suns, casting long, mournful shadows that danced across the polished floor, indistinguishable from the ghosts of the Empire's founders. Here the air smelled of ozone and ritual incense, a mixture designed to sharpen the mind and dull the passions. Yet today, passion, specifically the cold, sharp passion of fear, was the only currency being traded. High Counselor Vrail stood at the apex of the obsidian dais, his many-limbed form draped in the ceremonial robes of the decision-maker, his compound eyes twitching with a nervous energy that belied his statuesque posture. Before him, suspended in the center of the room via a complex holographic projector field, hung the image of the intruder. It was a vessel of such ugly, brutalist geometry that it offended the Ethelgard's aesthetic sensibilities on a primal level. It possessed no sweeping curves, no grown biological hull, no shimmering energy sails to catch the stellar winds. It was a block of dead matter, a scarred, charcoal-gray slab of metal that looked less like a starship and more like a tombstone hurled through the void by a careless god. It sat motionless at the very edge of the sensor perimeter, just beyond the heliopause of the Bythos system, silent, dark, and imposing. "It has not hailed us," Vrail said, his voice echoing through the acoustic perfection of the chamber, the clicking of his mandibles translated into the smooth, melodic trade tongue of the hegemony. "It has not powered its weapons, it has not raised shields, it simply exists. And yet the spectral analysis indicates a mass reading that defies the logic of our material science. Are we to believe that a primitive species, one that has barely crawled out of its gravity well, has constructed a vessel of such density?" Below the dais, Admiral Kael'thas paced the perimeter of the holographic pit. Unlike Vrail, whose body was soft and suited for the gentle art of politics, Kael'thas was encased in a bioarmor shell, a veteran of the border skirmishes against the hive fleets of the Outer Rim. He looked at the projection with a warrior's assessment, looking for weak points for firing arcs for intent. "Do not mistake silence for incompetence, Counselor," Kael'thas rumbled, the sound vibrating in his chest cavity. "The Terrans are new to the galactic stage, yes. We have watched their transmission leaks for 2 centuries. They are chaotic, fractured, emotional creatures, but look at the hull configuration. That is not a colony ship, that is not a trade vessel. The armor plating is ablative, layers upon layers of collapsed alloy. It is a warship, and it is sitting on our doorstep." "A warship that does not fight," whispered Science Officer Zalona, who hovered near the sensor consoles, her delicate, translucent fingers flying across the interface of hard light keys. She was the youngest in the room, her mind not yet calcified by the dogma of the Ethelgard's superiority. To her, the object was a puzzle, a terrifying mathematical impossibility that refused to resolve itself. "I have run the gravimetric scans 3 times, High Counselor. The results remain consistent, though they are disturbing. The vessel is not merely heavy. It is displacing local space-time. It is as if the ship is not fully here, or perhaps it is too much here." Vrail gestured dismissively with a primary limb. "Explain yourself, Science Officer. We do not have time for riddles. If it is a threat, we must mobilize the Grand Fleet. If it is a diplomatic envoy, we must prepare the rites of welcome, however distasteful it may be to welcome such primitives." Zalona hesitated, looking up at the towering figures of authority. "The density, Counselor. The ship measures only 3 kilometers in length, yet its mass signature rivals that of a small moon. If it were composed of standard durasteel or even our own crystalline lattice composites, it would collapse under its own gravity. It should not be able to move. It should not be able to maintain structural integrity. And yet it sits there, defying the curvature of space. My sensors are penetrating the outer hull, but they are being absorbed, not blocked, absorbed." "Absorbed?" Kael'thas stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "You mean stealth coding?" "No, Admiral," Zalona said, her voice trembling slightly. "I mean the energy from the scan enters the ship and does not return. It is like staring into a black hole that has been shaped into a rectangle. I propose we increase the gain on the active sensor array. We need to see what is inside that shell before we make a decision that could doom us or shame us. The chamber fell into a heavy silence. To actively scan a vessel with high-gain tachyon beams was, in galactic diplomacy, akin to drawing a weapon and pressing it against a stranger's chest to feel their heartbeat. It was an invasive, aggressive act. If the Terrans were indeed a warrior race, as Kael'thas suggested, such an act could trigger immediate retaliation. But the fear of the unknown was a potent venom. The Ethelgard had ruled this sector for 3,000 years because they knew everything. They mapped every star, catalogued every species, predicted every outcome. This dark slab of silence was a blind spot, and a blind spot was a vulnerability. "Do it," Vrail commanded, settling back onto his dais, his decision final. "But keep the fleet on standby. If that ship so much as powers a targeting laser, turn it into dust." Zelona nodded and turned back to her console. She initiated the sequence, redirecting the power of the station's massive orbital sensor array toward the lone human vessel. The hum of the station's reactor deepened, a subsonic vibration that rattled the teeth of everyone present. A beam of invisible, high-frequency tachyon particles, focused to a needlepoint of clarity, shot out across the void, traversing the millions of kilometers in an instant, striking the hull of the Terran ship. The holographic projection in the center of the room flickered. The gray, flat image of the ship began to peel away, layer by layer, as the data flooded back. At first, the readings were mundane, though impressive in their scale. The outer hull was indeed ablative armor, meters thick, scarred by cosmic dust and micrometeoroids. Beneath that lay a labyrinth of structural supports, massive ribs of titanium and tungsten that looked like the skeleton of some leviathan beast. Then came the atmosphere scrubbers, the water reclamation systems, the crew quarters, Spartan, efficient, cramped. There were humans on board, thousands of them, their biosigns faint, dormant, perhaps in cryostasis or deep meditation. "Standard biology," Vrail muttered, unimpressed. "Carbon-based, oxygen-breathing, vulnerable, they are nothing special." "Wait," Zelona said, her voice sharp. "Look deeper, the central axis of the ship, the engineering section." The scan pushed further, past the crew decks, past the cargo holds, into the heart of the vessel. And that was when the fear arrived. It didn't arrive with a scream or an explosion. It arrived as a set of numbers on a screen that made no sense, followed by a visual representation that froze the blood in Admiral Kael'thas's veins. In the center of the human ship, there was no standard fusion reactor. There was no zero-point energy module. There was no antimatter containment field. There was a cage. The holographic display struggled to render it. It showed a sphere of magnetic fields so intense they were visible on the scan as solid walls of force. Inside that sphere, suspended in a vacuum of absolute zero, was a singularity. A microscopic black hole, no larger than a grain of sand, screaming with the gravitational fury of a dying star. But it wasn't just a black hole. Wrapped around it, feeding into it, and drawing power from it, was a lattice of neural circuitry, biological components mixed with machine interfaces. And the readings, the energy output readings, were oscillating, not in a random pattern, but in a rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. It has a heartbeat, Zelona whispered, stepping back from the console, her hands clutching her chest. "The power source, it is alive." "Impossible," Kael'thas barked, though he leaned in closer, his mandibles flaring. "You are misinterpreting the data. A singularity cannot be alive." "It is not the singularity that is alive," Zelona said, her voice rising in panic. "It is what they are using to control it. Look at the containment field. It is not generated by machines. It is generated by minds." Scans zoomed in further. Surrounding the singularity were pods, hundreds of them. Inside each pod was a human, but not a normal human. These were withered, atrophied husks, heads shaved, wired directly into the magnetic lattice. Their brain activity was off the charts, synchronized into a single, terrifying Gestalt consciousness. They were focusing with perfect, unwavering discipline to hold the event horizon in check. They were using pure willpower, amplified by technology, to leash a monster. But the scan went deeper still. It pierced the singularity itself, looking for the fuel source. And what it found was not matter. It found a tear, a rupture in the fabric of the universe. The screen turned a violent shade of violet. Alarms began to wail throughout the station. "Termination," Zelona screamed. "Terminate the scan." "We have looked too deep." But it was too late. The tachyon beam had touched the core of the human ship. It had tapped on the glass of the tank. and something inside had looked back. The holographic projector exploded in a shower of sparks. Light fixtures shattered. Gravity in the chamber reversed for a split second, sending the High Counselors floating into the air before slamming them back down. The silence that followed was broken only by the ragged breathing of the Ethelgard leadership. Then the communications grid overrode every safety protocol. The main view screen, a massive pane of diamond glass overlooking the stars, flickered. The static cleared, replaced by an image. It was the bridge of the human ship. It was dim, lit only by the red glow of emergency tactical displays. In the center sat a man. He was old, his face lined with the geology of hard decisions, his hair white and cropped close. He wore a uniform of dark gray, unadorned by medals, functional and worn. He looked tired, infinitely tired, but his eyes were terrifying. They were calm. They were the eyes of a man who had watched galaxies die and had simply taken notes. He did not look angry, he looked disappointed. "This is Captain Elias Thorne of the TCS Acheron," the human said. His voice was gravel, low and resonant, translated instantly by the station's computer. "We picked up your scan, that was unwise." High Counselor Vrail scrambled to his feet, trying to regain his dignity. "I am High Counselor Vrail of the Ethelgard hegemony. You are in our sovereign space. You refused to hail us. We took necessary measures to ensure our security. Identify your cargo and your intent or be destroyed." Captain Thorne let out a slow breath. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, interlacing his fingers. He looked at Vrail not as a subject to a ruler, but as a teacher to a particularly slow child. "Counselor," Thorne said softly, "if we wanted to destroy you, we wouldn't have used weapons. We would have just stopped focusing." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Stopped focusing?" Kael'thas stepped forward, his warrior pride stinging. "You speak in riddles. We saw your core. You are using biological slaves to contain a singularity. It is barbaric. It is unstable. You are flying a bomb into our system." Thorne's expression shifted slightly. A flicker of pain, or perhaps pity. "Slaves? No, they are volunteers, every one of them, the psionic choir. They give their lives to sing the lullaby that keeps the door closed." "Door," Zalona stepped forward, her curiosity overriding her fear. "The singularity, it is a gateway." Thorne looked at the young science officer, and for the first time his expression softened. "You have good sensors. Yes, it's a door, but not to anywhere you want to go. We call it the entropy bleed. It's a tier in the bottom of the universe where the laws of physics break down and things try to crawl up." Vrail scoffed. "Superstition, primitive mythology to justify a dangerous drive system." "Is it?" Thorne asked. He tapped a command on his armrest. "Let me show you what we are holding back. Let me show you why we are so heavy. We aren't carrying cargo, Counselor. We are carrying the weight of a collapsed dimension." The screen split. On one side was Thorne's face, on the other a feed from the Acheron's internal sensors focused on the singularity. But this time the filters were removed. The Ethelgard saw it. It wasn't just a black hole. It was a mouth. It was a swirling vortex of shadow that seemed to be screaming, and in the darkness of the event horizon, shapes were moving. Geometries that hurt the eyes to look at. Writhing, impossible shapes that clawed at the magnetic walls, testing the strength of the human minds holding them back. "The logic of the universe dictates that entropy increases," Thorne said, his voice a narration to the nightmare. "Eventually, the lights go out. Eventually, order dissolves into chaos. We found out 50 years ago that chaos isn't just a process. It has a will. It wants to accelerate the end. It found a weak point in the fabric of reality near the Sol system. It tried to break through." Thorne paused, looking down at his hands. "We couldn't close the hole. We didn't have the technology. We tried nukes. We tried gravity waves. Nothing worked. The tier kept growing. It began to eat our outer colonies. It didn't just kill people. It erased them. It erased the memory of them. It turned order into noise." The silence in the Ethelgard chamber was absolute. Even Vrail was pale, his mandibles slack. "So," Thorne continued, "we did the only thing we could. We cut the piece of space containing the tier out of the universe. We built a ship around it, a cage, and we found that the only thing that could reinforce the walls of reality against that kind of nothingness was the observation of a conscious mind. The quantum observer effect weaponized. Aslan. As we look at it, as long as we will it to remain contained, it cannot break out." Kael'thas stared at the screen, horror dawning on him. You turned your ship into a prison for a cosmic event." Not a prison, Thorn corrected. A backpack, we carry it, because if we stay in one place too long, the local reality starts to wear thin. The strain on the local space-time becomes too great, so we run. We keep moving. We are the pallbearers of a dead dimension, Counselor. We have been running for 30 years. Why come here, Vrail whispered. Why bring this doom to Bythos? Because we are tired, Thorn said. The vulnerability in his voice was more terrifying than any threat. The choir is fading. The psychological strain of staring into the abyss 24 hours a day kills them. We lose a telepath every week. Our reactor cores are running on fumes. We didn't come to conquer you. We didn't come to fight. We came because your system has a unique distinctiveness. Your twin stars. Zelona gasped, the harmonic resonance. Thorn nodded at her. Smart girl, the gravitational interplay between your two suns creates a hyperstable Lagrange point, a zone of perfect stillness. We need to park the ship there for 48 standard hours. We need to vent the buildup of entropic radiation into your stars. They can handle it, they're young and hot. And we need to swap out the choir shifts. We need to sleep. If we don't stop and vent, the containment fails. And if the containment fails... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The image of the writhing shadows in the black hole said it all. If that cage broke, the Bythos system would be the first to vanish, followed by the rest of the sector. Vrail looked at Kael'thas. The Admiral looked at the Counselor. The political posturing, the arrogance, the debate about primitive Terrans had evaporated. They were looking at a species that had voluntarily strapped a bomb to its chest to save the neighborhood, a species that was walking through fire so the rest of the galaxy could stay cool. If we allow this, Vrail stammered, the risk, if your containment fails while you are in orbit. It won't fail, Thorn said, his voice hardening. Not if you let us work, but if you attack us, if you try to force us away. We will be forced to divert power from containment to shields, and then whatever happens, happens. It was a threat, but it was phrased as a law of physics. Push me, and I drop the world. We have no choice, Kael'thas said, his voice grim. Counselor, we must grant them the coordinates. Vrail hesitated. The Ethelgard did not bow to outsiders, but he looked at the screen, at the weary face of the human captain, and he realized that this was not a submission. This was a reprieve. Permission granted, Vrail said, his voice trembling. Proceed to the Lagrange point. Do not deviate. Do not scan our data networks. Do what you must and then leave. Understood, Thorn said. And Counselor, thank you. The screen went black. For the next 2 days, the Ethelgard watched. They watched with every sensor they had, passive and terrified. They watched the TCS Acheron limp into the precise gravitational saddle between the two burning suns. They watched as the ship opened massive vents along its flanks. It didn't vent gas, it vented darkness. Streams of pure, absolute blackness poured out of the ship like ink into water. The darkness spiraled into the suns, and for a moment the stars dimmed. The solar flares died down. The roaring fusion of the stars seemed to choke, then surged back brighter than before, digesting the entropy. Inside the High Command, Zelona monitored the comms. She heard the internal chatter of the human crew. She expected military discipline, barking orders. Instead, she heard music. They were singing. To keep the rhythm, to keep the focus of the choir synchronized during the critical venting process, the entire crew of the Acheron was singing. It was a low, mournful sound, a polyphonic chant that vibrated through the radio waves. It was a song of old Earth, a dirge of the sea, translated into the void. Oh, the ocean waves may roll, and the stormy winds may blow, but we poor sailors go skipping to the top, while the landlubbers lie down below. Zelona listened, mesmerized. The contrast between the cosmic horror they carried and the simple, defiant humanity of their song broke something in her world view. The Ethelgard believed in perfection, in structure. These humans believed in survival. They stared into the face of death and sang a sea shanty. As the 48th hour approached, the venting ceased. The vents closed. The black scar of the ship seemed to lighten, the oppressive gravity wave it generated smoothing out. Captain Thorn hailed them one last time. We are patched up, Thorn said. He looked slightly better, though the circles under his eyes remained. The choir is fresh. The reactor is stable. We're L. Eving. Captain, Vrail said. He had stayed in the chamber for 2 days, unable to look away. Where will you go? On, Thorn said. Always on. We have to keep moving. The tear is stable, but it's not healed. It will never heal. We are the wandering custodians. We'll head for the rim. Less population out there, fewer people to hurt if we trip. Is there? Zalona stepped forward. She couldn't help herself. Is there anything we can do? You are carrying a burden that belongs to the universe, yet you carry it alone. Thorn smiled. It was a sad, crooked smile. You gave us a place to rest. That's more than most do. Most just shoot. Keep your sensors sharp, kid. We aren't the only things crawling in the dark. We're just the ones that knock first. Wait, Kael'thas said. You said you are the custodians. How many? How many ships like yours are there? Thorn paused. His eyes shifted away, looking at something off-screen, perhaps a memory of a burning Earth or a fleet lost to the void. There were 12 of us, Thorn said softly. The Zodiac fleet, each carrying a piece of the shatter. He looked back at the camera. We're the last one left, Acheron out. The link cut. The Ethelgard watched as the Acheron turned. It didn't engage a warp drive. It didn't jump. It simply accelerated, pushing against the fabric of space with brute force, a heavy, unstoppable object moving into the eternal night. The chamber remained silent for a long time. The arrogance of the Ethelgard was gone, replaced by a cold, sobering realization. They had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy, the apex of civilization. They built glass towers and debated philosophy. Meanwhile, in the cold dark between the stars, humanity was out there. Dirty, tired, dying humanity. Driving a garbage truck full of apocalypse, singing songs to keep the devil locked inside, ensuring that the universe lived to see another sunrise. Vrail looked at his hands. They were trembling. Seal the sensor logs, he whispered. Classify this encounter as Omega level. Why? Kael'thas asked, his voice unusually quiet. Because, Vrail said, looking out at the stars that suddenly seemed very fragile. If our people knew what was out there, they would never sleep again, and if they knew that our safety depended on a single human ship holding the door shut, they would die of fear. Zalona looked at the empty spot in space where the Acheron had been. She didn't feel fear. She felt a strange, new emotion. Awe. They are not gods, she whispered to herself. Gods demand worship. These are janitors. They clean up the mess the gods left behind. She turned back to her console. The universe was bigger, darker, and more terrifying than she had ever imagined. But as she watched the twin suns burn bright and steady, she realized that as long as the humans were out there holding the line, there was still hope. But the silence of the Acheron lingered in her mind. We're the last one left. The weight of that sentence settled over the High Synod like a shroud. One ship, one crew, one mind, standing between existence and the void. The Ethelgard returned to their politics, their debates, their grand structures. But the eyes of the High Counselors had changed. They no longer looked at the stars with ownership. They looked at them with gratitude. And every time the lights flickered in the station, every time a shadow stretched a little too long in the corner of a room, they held their breath, wondering if the Acheron had finally stopped singing. In the deep void, the TCS Acheron moved on. Inside the hull, the choir began a new shift. The minds linked. The will hardened. The captain poured a cup of synthetic coffee and looked at the map. Next stop, the nebula of size, Thorn muttered. Long way to go. The ship hummed, a lonely note in the cosmic symphony, carrying the darkness so the light could keep burning. And the aliens who had scanned them, who had seen the monster in the hold, would never be the same again. They had seen the fear, but they had also seen the courage that contained it, and that in the end was the most terrifying thing of all. Humanity wasn't powerful because they conquered. They were powerful because they endured. The universe held its breath. The Acheron sailed on.